In creating complex scenes, I've struggled a lot with trying to balance so many competing ideas. And, how do I keep my head on straight? How do I keep sort of, I guess, a purity of intent with my shapes? And one way I've come to start trying to think about it, and essentially, like almost kind of like a painter, in the sense that like I'm looking at my composition and I'm thinking, okay, I want uh, this feels like it has a pretty good affordance of, let's see, a pathway that way. There's little risk. I want to put some more denial over here, so I'll put some more foliage in here. I'll make this higher, that sort of thing, and I sort of start trying to push and pull and add a little bit more of one element versus another. And the same thing goes with this. If I feel like people aren't exploring this section as much as I want to, things like this, I can add a a doorway that sort of draws people over and maybe suggests a little bit of a reward. Case like this, how do I add a little bit more of a sense of risk in this versus this side? So, how do you sort of break down, a complex scene like this into, um, you know, basic design concepts, or a scene like this? There's so many different paths you could take and stuff like that. How do you sort of keep these in order, and sort of how do you create these shapes uh, with a specific intent in mind? And so, I guess what I should propose is thinking about this in terms of almost like a painter's palette. So a painter looks at their painting, at their composition, decides I want, okay, a little bit more light, some whiter over here. I need to put some more yellow, some more red, that sort of thing. When I think about sort of the concepts that are at the root of shape conversation, things I want to communicate to the player, I start with the idea of risk and reward, as I was mentioning earlier, and sort of the relationship between those. And I look at, you know, um, affordance and denial, and to me, these are sort of the cardinal concepts as far as what I'm trying to communicate across to the player. And so, I'm going to go ahead and take these and sort of propose. We have our own sort of color wheel. These are our cardinal colors. I realize that these don't quite match up with, a lot of times cardinal colors are red, green, and yellow, or red, I'm sorry, red, green, and blue, RGB, or so on and so forth, whatever. It doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to communicate here is that these are sort of the elements that we have to work with, and it's kind of up to the designer to figure out, like, what does this mean in the concept or the context of their scene. So in a case like this, how do we identify what sections are what are these shapes sort of communicating to us? And I'm just trying to take a little bit of a a guess here, but sort of filling in. Okay, so we have some blue for reward. So what are the shapes here that sort of offer up a sense of reward? So if I look back here, definitely have this doorways here. A lot of times the doorway, like I was saying before, is inviting. It tells us that there may be something worth hidden behind there. Um, any place that feels sort of sheltered or purposely kind of hidden might feels like it might have a reward. But I think especially this section up here, because it feels like it's on top of a precipice or on top of a goal sort of area. I could really see this feels like a place where I can find rewards. Maybe up here as well, if this is a platform. Let's talk about the affordances here. So the affordance of, it looks like there's this bit of a stair here that's taking us up, and maybe taking us up here. There's a affordance of being able to stand on this platform up here. These doors offer the affordance of going through and exploring here. Maybe there's an edge here to climb on. What are our denials? Obviously, there's a giant cliff here that is sort of denial. I need to find another way around it. Maybe that's what this affordance is taking me. We've got a wall here. It doesn't look very climbable, and the same thing with this, and this is sort of obscuring my view of the area behind it. What are the risks here? How am I showing risk? I'm not seeing a lot of risk in this particular composition here, aside from maybe wasting my time by going through here, or the fact that I think you could also possibly count, and this is a little bit of a stretch, but all this open space where I see nothing, essentially trying to explore and really poke my head in every single nook and cranny here feels like a lot of a risk. So that's kind of how I'm going to paint it for representation here. And obviously, like, this is kind of just how I'm considering this sort of in my mind's eye. You know, I wouldn't expect, and I don't suggest that you sort of take images of your pieces and sort of color them like this, but more think about how all of your shapes communicate to the player these four sort of core concepts. Let's look again at another one of the Uncharted shots that I have. So this is Island Arrival and Uncharted 4, and you know, it's a pretty complicated sort of scene that we sort of start to break down how do these four core concepts of composition sort of fit in here. So it looks like we've got, this all looks like death and risk, that sort of thing. And we've got a lot of denial up here. This doesn't look very climbable. This is not climbable. This looks like a big empty wall that cannot be climbed. Same thing with, like, I'm not climbing a waterfall, but there may be, you know, as I said, with, you know, waterfalls sometimes hide secrets, as this one in fact does eventually later on. And what about our reward spaces? So, you know, a lot of times, and, you know, as I described before, rewards aren't always places that are specifically, you know, like treasures or something like that, but also spaces that offer other types of softer rewards, great places for aesthetic views, and great places to sort of add to some spatial mastery. So places that are up high, so I would say like spaces like this, for instance, are great places to sort of imply reward, and maybe it's the same thing with this space back here, which feels like kind of a secret sort of path, and kind of hidden. It feels like you can find sort of a secret here. So, you know, sort of taking this concept and pushing it to this, you know, we have a lot of affordance of this path that sort of takes us this way and this way. We've got a bunch of sort of climbable walls here. The non-climbable walls I've sort of painted green, so these are the denials here. A bunch of risk down here. We don't want to be jumping in the water. That's sort of what these shapes represent. And yeah, like, so these are the reward spaces up here. So that's essentially how trying to break down from the simpler perspective, like the shape language, basically how I sort of paint with shapes in order to create something that communicates to the player.